Welcome to The Growth Project, a podcast brought to you by Synergy Performance. Our mission with this podcast is to explore the topics of growth, performance, and personal development through conversations with individuals pursuing success and by using current events in business and sports to discuss strategies on how you can grow into the individual that you want to be.
All right, welcome back to The Growth Project, a podcast brought to you by Synergy Performance. We are live here in Greenville, South Carolina today. Really grateful to have you listening. As always, we're appreciative of people taking time to spend time with The Growth Project. Excited about our podcast today. Now, you guys probably remember we had dedicated the month of May to a focus on mental toughness and got a lot of good feedback about some of the things we discussed. And I think one reason that topic tends to really hit home with people is it's just applicable to all walks of life, regardless of who you are or what you do or where you live or where you are in life. Because let's face it, we just all need a healthy dose of mental toughness regardless of what we're doing. So that was our May focus. I know it's June. I do have calendar reading skills, and so I'm well aware we're now in the month of June. But we've decided we want to do one more episode on this topic. And so really excited to have Dr. Beck with us today. Nick, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
It's good to have Nick. And so the reason we wanted to bring Nick in to do one more episode on mental toughness is, he has studied this topic extensively. Anybody who knows kind of what it takes to earn a PhD knows that you've got to do that, kind of accomplish that daunting task of you got to go write a dissertation. And I know that you and I were both equally thrilled about writing dissertations once upon a time, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We're so excited about that. But Nick actually wrote his dissertation on the topic of mental toughness. And so what we can't do is, unpack that whole thing today, of course, because it was 100-something pages, I'm sure. But we wanted to bring Nick in and touch on a couple elements of that. So before we dive in, though, Nick, just, again, it's the first time getting a chance to bring on the podcast. Tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you got here with us, and just help people understand kind of who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually a pretty interesting story. When I was in college, I knew I wanted to pursue psychology. Wasn't sure exactly in what realm I wanted to do that, and I looked up Milt Lauder on Google, and I said sports psychology, Clemson, and found his contact information, consulted with him, and said, how do I do what you do? How do I become a sports psychologist? And he sort of painted the way for me, and I followed that to a T. I went to graduate school at the University of North Texas, and it was a dual degree in counseling psychology and sports psychology. And that's why I did my dissertation in the sport realm, and completed my PhD, and then worked a couple different jobs and ended up here at Synergy actually last October, and I'm so excited to be back in my hometown in Greenville, South Carolina. But really I credit Milt to kind of pointing me the direction that I wanted to go.
Yeah, so some people do actually listen to Milt, it sounds like.
Some people, yeah.
No, that is a neat story. And I tell you, there's two things about that I think are really cool. One is I hope that we all, like when a student, like in your situation, contacts us as professionals, mm-hmm. I know this happens sometimes. Mm-hmm. And if I'm being honest, I don't always follow through on every one of those when someone wants to kind of talk to me about something.
Yeah.
You can probably relate to that too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so I love hearing that because it helps me remember why that's so important.
Yeah, he took the time and sat down with me, and he must have spent an hour with me talking about psychology and what he does for Clemson University. And so it was huge for me.
That's awesome. So I love that, and I also love the fact that where you were in your career and kind of your life at that time, that you were just curious and willing to ask questions and willing to ask for help. I think that's so vital in terms of how we really figure out what we want to do and how things are going to look in our life.
Yeah, and we need mentors.
Yep.
Absolutely. We need mentors to help shape us a little bit, but I had this vision in mind of being a psychologist and working with athletes and helping people, and Milt helped guide me to what that might look like.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. All right, so we know that you've been here with us since October, which is great. It's been great to have you, doing a great job. Help us understand, in thinking about, we'll go back to your graduate school days, the assignment is always, hey, you got to write a dissertation. Like, right. It's the same for everybody. Mm-hmm. But in the realm of psychology, there are a lot of different places you could go with that. Many different topics that any person could pursue to write the dissertation. Why mental toughness?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was in graduate school, mental toughness had gained some momentum from a sports psychology research perspective. So people were starting to try and research it, figure out what it is. But I was hearing it all the time in popular sports culture. So I'd watch basketball game, and at some point commentators would mention mental toughness. And so for me, I thought it was a great way to take something that could be kind of academic, but really be able to apply it. So as you probably know, psychological research can sometimes be a little bit removed from applied work.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And so I really wanted something that could bridge that gap, and mental toughness seemed to really fit that for me. It was interesting, and I knew that I could be speaking with athletes I work with about mental toughness and have a great background in what it means and what it is.
Yeah, that's a good point you made too, because I think you're spot on. So many of the things that get extensively studied just don't feel that relevant.
No, they can be overly specific or dry or too academic, and when you're working with an athlete, it's hard to kind of get them to grab onto that.
Yeah, and the thing about mental toughness, and we kind of mentioned this earlier, that I think is just so critical that we understand this, is the way it pervades all walks of life.
Absolutely.
Of course this is important to athletes. I know you've studied athletes extensively and worked with them, and if we're talking about a football player or a basketball player, it doesn't really matter what sport, they need to be mentally tough. The same is true of, and I know a lot of people that listen to our podcast are what I would call like working professionals, right? I mean, these are managers, these are leaders, these are senior executives with companies, they're coaches, they're teachers, and these are people that need a high level of mental toughness as well. I mean, think about it realistically. Let's take the working professional who is trying to do the best job they can day in and day out in their career. They might have a family where they're trying to raise kids responsibly. We might have a woman who's trying to be a good wife to her husband, or a husband to a wife. There's just a lot going on.
Yes.
And what do we know in America these days? What's the biggest culprit of both health and joy? Stress.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And what's one of the best things we have to battle stress and just all the things that are coming at us in life is it's mental toughness, it's resiliency. These are vital skills that people really need.
Yeah, and you used an example yesterday that I thought was a great one, where even just getting up in the morning and going and working out requires a certain level of mental toughness. You're tired, you're stressed. I could snooze for another 30, 45 minutes. And having the resolve and the values and the beliefs and the attitudes to get up and do that requires that mental toughness, and that applies to everyone.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
All right, so now, Nick, I know, like we said, we could probably create our longest episode ever.
Mm-hmm.
if we decided, okay, hey, we're going to really get into this dissertation and go deep in as many places as possible. But
people might start sleeping, to be honest.
That's not about you or your research, but I think you're right. I think people would probably tune out. So we're not going to do that. Instead, I think what our game plan will be today is we want to focus primarily on kind of two main areas or two themes related to some of the research you've done and the work that you did. The first one being, and let's go ahead and dive into this. I know when you and I spoke previously about where we really wanted to focus, one of the points that you made that I think is a great one is this idea that one of the things you saw in your data, and that has really held up in other studies as well, is that mental toughness is contextually driven. It's situationally driven. So talk to us a little bit about what does that mean?
Yeah, so it's really helpful for people to think about mental toughness in this thing that comes out in a variety of different situations. So you can't just describe it as this person is mentally tough or they're not, because you need to see them across a variety of contexts. Yeah. And so the mental toughness that is kind of required at a last second shot at the end of a basketball game is different than what's required from an executive to lead a team, of managers. Like there's a different set of skills that are necessary to do that. And so we want to help people to see how are they applying mental toughness, how are they exhibiting mental toughness across the variety of things that they're faced with. You're really on a day-to-day basis. So to use an athlete perspective, training requires a different level of mental toughness, so to speak, than being in a game and competing that way. So from that perspective, it's helpful for people to be able to evaluate themselves. What is the situation calling for?
Yeah. Okay. So let's do an example, because I think you're exactly right, and it's important that what we're really trying to do is we don't want to be thinking about the idea of mental toughness with an individual as like a checkbox.
Right.
Like does this individual possess this trait or do they not? Are they mentally tough or are they not? And the research has shown very clearly that's just not how it works.
No.
So an example would be, let's say we'll use the world of sports. That's an easy way to talk about this. Let's say we've got a college basketball player in the second half of a game. There's a minute to go. His team is trailing by 7 points. Team has possession of the ball, takes the ball to the basket, gets fouled. 2 free throws come in. You're down by 7 with a minute to go. Like, these are really important shots. We need to make these shots. Mm-hmm. Goes to the line, misses both shots. Okay, let's take this forward. Somehow, some way, his team has even narrowed that gap even more. 3 seconds to go in the game. Same guy's back on the line. Now, what's his most recent memory of shooting free throws? I missed both the free throws last time I was standing here.
Right.
Here we are. We're down by 1. 3 seconds to go. I've got 2 shots. Mm-hmm. Steps up there, misses both of them. Mm-hmm. They lose. Game over. Go take a shower. We're going home. In terms of mental toughness, what can we conclude from that moment?
Well, I would say in that moment, the moment was too big for him. Okay. He did not possess the adequate emotion regulation skills, perhaps the right kind of mindset regarding how to approach those free throws.
Yeah.
So we could say that in that particular context, he did not exhibit mental toughness. But you fast forward to that next day, what does this athlete do with that? Does he go into the weight room? Does he hold his head high? Does he work hard? Does he assess his performance and go, how can I get better from this? Or does he sulk? Does he shut down? Does he then avoid that moment moving forward? And so that next day provides a whole nother opportunity to exhibit mental toughness and live according to that.
Right.
When the previous evening, we would probably both agree he did not demonstrate mental toughness. He perhaps the moment was too big and he choked under that pressure.
Yeah. Okay. So then let's unpack that. What I hear you saying there is there's 2 different challenges at play here. So the first one, during the game, mm-hmm. clearly the main thing that is driving the challenge from a toughness is pressure.
Right, absolutely.
Like, can he handle pressure? And mental toughness and handling pressure are closely related. Right?
They are.
And so your ability to handle pressure effectively is closely linked to your level of mental toughness. So if our sample size is that game, then we would conclude he lacks the skills needed to execute under pressure from a mental toughness standpoint.
Well, and I'll add on to that by providing another example. Steph Curry recently admitted in an article that he, in the Game 7 of the NBA Finals, I think it was the 2016 Finals, and I believe this article is in the Performance Newsletter, he said that he handled that moment poorly and put up kind of a heroic, ill-advised shot.
Huh.
I don't think either one of us would say that Steph Curry is not mentally tough. I don't think anyone would really argue with us on that and say Steph Curry is definitely not mentally tough because he did this thing. Yeah. But in that particular context, in that particular moment, the pressure was too much for him, and he made a bad decision about the shot to take.
Right.
That is a very specific situation. He's not able to kind of practice that, so to speak. But across a variety of other contexts, he really does exhibit that mental toughness.
Right.
So the pressure of that, the uniqueness of that situation brought out something that, had him taking that bad shot.
Yeah. So let's go back to our example a second ago so what we know is managing pressure, handling pressure, and executing is an element of mental toughness that this person lacked, right?
Right.
But as you said, if this person gets up the next day with the right mindset, the right approach, they're back in the gym, practicing free throws. They come into practice the next day with a high level of enthusiasm for what they're doing. There's determination there. Mm-hmm. They're continuing to demonstrate passion in what they're doing. I would argue that's from a response standpoint. So the mental toughness needed to respond appropriately is without question there.
Right.
Agreed. But that's a different skill.
It is. Yeah, it is. And it's all wrapped up under this heading of mental toughness, and that's why mental toughness is hard to define and really describe, and that's been covered in previous podcasts. So that athlete has to understand, like, they can't just define themselves, well, I missed those free throws yesterday. Apparently I'm not mentally tough. The coach says, you're just not mentally tough, and that's that.
Yes.
They got to come back in that next day and exhibit sort of a different form of what we would describe as mental toughness.
Yeah. And then the other thing I think that's really important to point out with this example is to identify, we know there are specific skills associated with executing mental toughness, right? And so there's two apparent ones right there. The first one, which we kind of highlighted, is executing under pressure.
Right.
In big moments is a skill that I would argue is maybe somewhat deficient for this person.
Yes.
Given the way it turned out.
Yeah, and I would add, likely that is due to maybe a deficit in emotion regulation skills, that ability to understand their anxiety and their tension and reduce that in those big moments so they can be free to shoot that shot.
Yeah.
And the other would just be their attitude about what that moment means, their belief system, and that's that growth mindset, where this is an opportunity for me to accomplish something and take advantage of this moment versus, oh my gosh, what happens if I miss?
Yeah.
You need both of those things in that moment to execute effectively.
That's exactly right. And then so there's a skill very much tied up in that, and then kind of fast forward to the next day, there's a very different and unique skill needed in order to demonstrate some of the resolve we talked about of taking the next step, right? Like moving on, transitioning into an action plan, figuring out what needs to be different so that we don't repeat history.
Yes.
But that response skill set is not the same mental skills we're talking about that are needed to handle the moment the previous night.
Right, absolutely. And that's perhaps also in the realm of a growth mindset, but it's seeing failure as opportunity for growth. It's seeing failure as something to learn from and improve upon. And then having the humility, I think, I got to work.
Yeah, right. If I don't want this to happen again, I got to do something about it. It's got to be an active process.
Right.
And we can see examples very, let's think about another context or another arena. Let's go into kind of the business world or the corporate world. And I know that a lot of people that are a part of our podcast and that kind of follow and listen here are in domains such as sales. So I can very easily see in the world of sales, there are going to be big moments that people walk into where they are attempting to convey the right message, the right ways, with the right timing, have the right counter arguments, like everything kind of just button up just nice, and it's not going to go well.
Right.
But there's truly an execution associated with that moment, and when the pressure becomes too great, if a person lacks, and that's one of the things you see in mental toughness we've talked about, is the ability to push back pressure and execute anyways. And if they don't execute in that moment, then therein lies what we're talking about, lack of mental toughness.
Yeah.
But if that person can leave that call, leave the building, go get in their car, drive down the road to whatever's next that day, and in a pretty short period of time, kind of put that behind them, forget about it, move on, and not dwell on it, that's a different type of mental toughness that I would argue they're doing pretty well with.
Yes, absolutely. It requires a different set of skills that you're saying, and there is, if they can understand that there's another moment then coming up, like let me approach this next moment, let me approach this next sales call, let me approach whatever that next thing is in a mentally tough way, then I think they're doing well.
Yeah.
But far too often it's either I have it or I don't, and so I shut down. This was a failure, I shut down.
Yep. And so let's get practical with this, because again, I think we've got, if I'm a coach or I'm a manager, I'm a leader of people, I manage people, I'm in any way in the business of trying to develop people. How I think about the people I'm trying to develop is huge.
Yes.
I mean, we know that, like, if we're honest with ourselves, one of the biggest mistakes a leader can make is to allow yourself to develop a notion about a person that you don't give any opportunity to change. It's just like, well, this is who they are. Right? And so as we think about people, and if you're a leader of people, and a lot of people listening to this podcast are, we've got to stop thinking of mental toughness in people in the form of a checkbox.
Right.
We've got to go further. We've got to drill down on it more specifically and understand what type of mental toughness are we really talking about. Where does the void exist? Is it in the realm of execution under pressure? Is it in the realm of responding and moving forward effectively? And those are just two examples, but I think really what I hear you saying coming from your data is we've got to go further with how we conceptualize it.
Yes, entirely. There is a person can have that commitment and that drive and that growth mindset but they struggle to regulate their emotions perhaps. And that's a needed aspect of mental toughness. So if a manager, if a coach can recognize that particular aspect of someone's functioning and intervene, then they give that person a chance to really grow and improve. But if they just say, well, you screwed this up and clearly you're not mentally tough, or clearly you're not a fit, then they don't give them any opportunity for growth or change, and they're doing a disservice both to them and to themselves and their team potentially.
Yeah. So I think the blueprint for this could look even as simple as this: is if whatever domain you exist in, whatever your industry or your area is, whether it's sports or business or law or whatever it might be, in all likelihood, there are 3 to 5, and then there are probably more, but if we try to narrow this down, there are 3 to 5 very important actions or behaviors associated with what you do. Mm-hmm. So I'll use an example here and talk about let's talk about sales, right? Well, what do you have to be able to do effectively? You've got to be able to, like, while under pressure, deliver the message well.
Right.
Another one would be, you've got to be able to move on pretty effectively.
Yeah, you got to hear no and be able to be okay with that and at least move on. Absolutely.
Yeah, and there's just 2. Like, if we're going to make a list of 3 to 5, but I think a very action-oriented, practical step would be, if you're a coach or a manager out there, think about your team and write down each of the people on your team, and write down these 3 to 5 key actions that we believe are critical to success in this area. And go action by action and fairly evaluate, how mentally tough is this person when it comes to this? How mentally tough are they when it comes to that? Mm-hmm. And let's do a workup of sorts where we help both ourselves and our people understand where they are possessing and demonstrating some strength, and then conversely, where they're demonstrating some weakness, where we want to focus our development efforts.
Right. Yeah, and you were given the example yesterday, which I thought was a good one. We were talking through that missed free throw at the end of the game versus that athlete who is in the gym every day, who's a motivator for teammates, who you can rely on to get into the gym and work as hard as he possibly can and be focused on improvement. So you could identify that this athlete needs to grow in the area of regulating their emotions in clutch moments under pressure. They don't seem to do very well in that, but they're a hugely important part of our team and how they approach practice and training and getting better.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so big rock number 1, as far as today goes, we've got to understand and think about this construct as being situationally or contextually driven. We're no longer going to consider it and understand it to be kind of the checkbox or
right, yes or no.
Yeah,
kind of deal.
It's not a binary construct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's transition, because I think this other point we want to cover today is really important as well. And we've heard this. We get a lot of opportunities, fortunately, to do some workshop and facilitate groups where we're talking about these topics exactly. And one of the things that comes up, and we have to always be very aware of, what are the objections? Where do people get stuck when they're trying to really understand these things and think about how it applies to their own life? One of the most common objections we hear is people are born a certain way, and they either have this or they don't.
Right.
Like it's how they're wired. It's how they're built. And people are going to just be that way. And so I'm going, and this isn't what I believe, this is what I hear people say of, I'm going to do my best to assess and evaluate what type of person I'm dealing with here. And in doing that, I'll know. Like, I'll be able to figure out whether or not this is a mentally tough person or if it isn't. And if it isn't, quite frankly, I'm probably going to need to move on.
Right.
Because there's not a whole lot I can do about that.
Mm-hmm.
So Nick, talk to us about that mentality and what your data showed relative to that thought.
Right. So my research was looking at kind of the development of mental toughness. What are the factors in the environment specifically that help to develop or create a greater level of mental toughness? So it is not something that someone is just born with, because as we were just talking about, you need to expose and see people across a variety of environments and contexts to really get a clear picture of who this person is and how they operate under these different scenarios.
Right.
So the climate, whether it's the climate of an office or the climate of a team, can really impact how that person develops what we're describing or defining as mental toughness.
Yeah.
A particular climate that's just, did we win or lose, is not going to be very conducive to that person looking at quote unquote failures and figuring out how to learn from them. It's like, no, that was a failure because we lost and that's it, and then we go from there.
Right.
You know, so really that climate that I think business leaders create, CEOs create, coaches create, influences how someone is going to be able to respond over time to difficulty, adversity.
Right. Yeah. Because I think if we craft that message and we create this world we're living in where the only acceptable outcome is victory, and there's many forms of that. Like, so that could be winning a game, it could be hitting a number sales wise, it could be, you know, we have returns on our in our stock price this year that aligns with what the key stakeholders wanted. Like, there's all kinds of outcomes.
Right.
But if the only form of success is we achieve the outcome, you know, some people can't handle that.
Sure. Yeah.
And of course some can, but a lot of people can't handle that. And because the climate is what that is, pressure is through the roof, mental toughness, resilience, those things become really, really difficult to achieve.
Yeah, and I think that argument that you were saying some people make of either they have it or they don't, you know, at what point is that really true? Are they saying, okay, this 7-year-old kid, he has mental toughness or he doesn't? I'm not sure many people would agree with that, but once they reach a college age, maybe, some people are saying, okay, well, now it's definitely either they have it or they don't.
Yeah.
It's not something that someone is born with, for
Right.
sure, but it's also something that I think my research showed that can be developed really well into adulthood and you know, across someone's life, and exposing yourself to adversity and difficulty and having a good growth mindset about that really is a part of mental toughness.
Yeah. And what you said earlier, that key word, environment, can't be overstated enough here. And so I think about examples. We all like, you know, here's what we're doing for a living at this point in our lives. We've all had previous jobs.
Right.
You know, fast food. I worked at the baseball field when I was in high school.
Yeah, I worked for a moving company.
Yeah, there you go. So we've all done a bunch of different things. And the reason I think that's relevant is, I know me personally, there were jobs along the way, particularly some of those like baseball field, fast food type jobs, where when I showed up, I thought a certain way and behaved a certain way because of the environment that had been created.
Absolutely.
Right? And so when I had supervisors that were critical and demeaning, I just didn't want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had asked that question of, was I mentally tough in some of the ways that maybe I needed to be, I probably would have flunked some of those tests, quite honestly.
Right.
And one of the biggest reasons was what I just said. I didn't want to be there. That wasn't a leader worth following. I didn't believe in the way that things were done. I didn't agree with the culture that had been created. Mm-hmm. And that created within me an emotional, you know, set of emotions such as resentment, frustration, disengagement. Mm-hmm. Those are recipes for people lacking mental toughness. Right? And I think there's a school of thought that would then say, well, gosh, if those are the things that are going on, well, then that's when a person should be the most mentally tough. Mm-hmm. But it just doesn't really work that way. It's like, do we want to create a scenario that makes people most likely to do those things? Or do we want to create one that makes people more likely to just kind of move in another direction?
Yeah, because you might have 1 out of 1,000 people who in that particular work scenario seem to be fine with it or thrive or whatever that is, but you want to create a culture where the majority of the people that are there are growing and learning and getting tougher and understanding themselves and all those sorts of things. And
right.
There's a lot that people can do to create that.
Right. And I think there's something to be said about and this is, I think this term is overused these days, quite frankly, but this idea of kind of this old school mentality of, okay, if we want people to be really tough mentally, we're going to just beat them up all the time.
Right, yeah.
Like that, we're going to beat them up, we're going to be harsh, we're going to be critical, and if we're tough enough, then they'll be tough too. And that's just not what the research shows.
No, I mean, my research specifically was looking at that relationship between what's called like a task involving motivational climate, which is essentially like a very positive, goal-focused climate where it's, hey, are you getting better? Are we mastering these skills? Are you learning to deal with adversity? Those types of environments were related to mental toughness.
Yeah.
Not the environments of, are you winning or are you losing? You compete, and if you don't win, then clearly you're not good enough. Like, that was not related to mental toughness, and actually it was negatively, in some ways, correlated with mental toughness.
So when that was the primary message or the narrative in the environment, we saw people basically less resilient, less mentally tough. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And to add another piece, parents had a huge part in that. So I think sometimes we just think about, we leave it to the coaches perhaps to develop kids in athletics, and parents have a huge role in that. And a lot of people listening to this podcast likely have children, and they can give a lot of very important messages that influence the development of mental toughness.
Yeah. And to me, a lot of it, I think it helps to think about discussions like this with the idea of the pendulum, right? And so if old school was the pendulum is way over here to one side, if we're just going to be hard on people, and we're going to be harsh, and we're going to bring it, and you better just be prepared for it because this is how it's going to be. Well, let's face it, the pendulum has probably kind of overcompensated in more recent years of hey, you're great.
Right.
You're so wonderful, you're so brilliant, you're so talented. And we are by no means endorsing a message that sounds like that.
Right.
Of we're going to overdo it. We're going to create kind of a utopian mentality of everything okay. Everything we're not saying that at all. And neither of us would advocate for that.
No.
And both places of the pendulum being situated there is dangerous, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Because I think what you end up dealing with is if the pendulum is in that area of, man, this is just really harsh. You got people who are just kind of, they tend to resent the leaders eventually, and they want out.
Yep.
They don't want to be a part of this. And you really haven't made them tougher. I think it's kind of disillusioned. On the other end, we end up with people who are entitled.
Right.
Who think they're the greatest thing ever. They don't want any feedback. And as soon as you challenge them, they just disagree with you.
Yeah.
Right?
If you protect them from any kind of adversity, challenge, difficulty, then you are also doing a disservice because they don't have that opportunity to develop the skills that we're talking about that we relate to mental toughness.
Exactly. And I know it's probably easier said than done, but what we really want to accomplish is moving that pendulum closer to the middle, achieving balance, and understanding that the way people grow in terms of mental toughness and resiliency is they're subjected to challenging things and they can see measured success in the process.
Yes.
And I think that's the key phrase there, is that when they are subjected to these demanding, challenging things, it doesn't always mean it equals victory in the end. But instead of, and sometimes it is victory. Sometimes hey, you hit your goal. You hit your number. Sometimes it is, hey, you won the game. That's great.
Right.
But it's being able to recognize and measure success or progress in the midst of challenging situations.
Right.
That's how people get better. So if we never subject them to challenges, we're robbing them of the opportunity to grow. And if we only subject them to challenges that, quite frankly, they can't accomplish, we should never expect them to grow.
Yeah, and it goes back to that situationally dependent nature of mental toughness, because the situation is so important for figuring out and developing and really solidifying that mental toughness. And so leaders and coaches have to create and find a way to expose their athletes and their employees to a wide range of challenges and difficulties so they can see that and develop that.
Yep. And that's where it comes in. One of the things Milton and I talk a lot about is I think the true skill of a coach, the true art of a coach, is knowing when to add pressure and when to take it away.
Yeah, I like that.
And that's what we're saying. And that relates to any form of leadership, right? So if you are a manager of people and you've got 10 people on your team, when do you need to dial it up and create an opportunity for people to really kind of rise to the occasion and prove some things to themselves and others? Or when do you need to be able to kind of say the right thing or do the right thing to help them know, hey, you know what, it's okay.
Right.
And he or she's got my back. He or she supports me. Yeah, they want me to give everything I have, but they're aware enough and they recognize that I don't ultimately control everything that happens in this market.
Sure. And it goes back to what you were saying about that leader in the business world writing down and having a good understanding of where their employees are at in terms of the different aspects of mental toughness. Where are they weaker? Where are they stronger?
Yep.
And then they can figure out where to apply a little bit of that pressure to sort of build that up.
Right.
If this person seems to really struggle, to use an athletic example, if they seem to really struggle in those high pressure moments, then let's try and create that, in practice.
Absolutely.
I know, I think Dabo, in terms of the kicking game, making sure that they expose kickers to that pressure in practice so they can get better.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we gotta make things difficult on people sometimes.
Yeah.
But we just have to be wise in how we do that.
Right.
All right, so I know we gotta move toward kind of summarizing some things and closing some things up here in a second. But again, just these two main points that we want you to hear very clearly today are: one, mental toughness is a situationally or contextually driven construct. It is not a simple yay or nay, yes or no, check or no check box type of deal. There are constructs out there that exist, but this isn't one of them.
Yeah, let's get away from defining it that way because, like I mentioned before, it does a disservice to ourselves and to other people to have it be this checkbox yes or no type of deal.
And then secondly, like we said, one of the key objections that we hear and have heard on this topic is, well, this is just how people are. And we'll go back to something we've talked a ton about, growth and fixed mindset. I can't think of a better example of just a fixed mindset as a leader.
Right.
And here's where that really worries me and concerns me as well. If a leader is thinking about someone on their team that way, then you better believe they're doing the same thing in other facets of who this person is.
Definitely.
Either they're just not any good at this. It's just they're not gonna be.
Yeah, and then they will, in many ways, create that reality for that employee because that employee they're going to feel that and they're going to experience that, and then they're not going to really understand that they can grow from there. Because well, my manager does not believe in me. I don't believe in myself. Game over.
Yeah, and think about what a complete lose-lose that is.
Yep.
Imagine showing up for work every day as the manager, and you've already decided this person can't get any better.
Right.
Who wants to show up for that?
Mm-hmm.
Especially, you think about a total lose-lose. There are plenty of managers in situations where they can't even change that if they wanted to. If a person had decided, this person just doesn't have it on my team and they need to be out of here, some people don't even have the authority to make that decision.
Right.
And so I guess we just all kind of live in misery and for an indefinite amount of time.
Yeah, it makes sense to take an approach of let's look at the variables that are at play here and the situations and what are the contexts in which I'm saying this person doesn't exhibit this? And are there other contexts in which they do? Mm-hmm. And let's see if we can foster that, strengthen that, and then shore up the areas where they don't.
And so for the leaders out there, I really would just recommend you think about that idea of the pendulum and do your best to assess in certain areas with certain people, where are you positioning that pendulum? Where are you adding pressure? Where are you trying to take pressure away? What's the whole dynamic look like? Because ultimately, as we said, the goal here is we want to create an environment that gives people a chance to get better and develop these skills.
Yeah, a win-win environment, so to speak.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, Nick, so as we kind of wind down, tell me any kind of closing thoughts you have on this topic or any other things you might want to mention.
Well, I just think I know what is emphasized a lot in this podcast is that growth mindset. And really my research demonstrated how much that growth mindset, it's referred to as a task goal orientation in psychological research, how much that is tied with mental toughness, positively correlated with mental toughness. There is a value system and a belief system that we describe as a growth mindset that really allows athletes and other individuals to exhibit mental toughness in a variety of contexts because they have an approach that's very conducive to optimal performance.
Yeah. I think that's really good for leaders to be thinking about and to me the other cool thing about that is they're developing the mental toughness. They're also developing further mastery in whatever the task is. Mm-hmm. So I'm getting better at whatever I'm trying to get better at skill wise. All the while I'm kind of improving my mental toughness as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, this has been fun, man. I really appreciate your wisdom on this topic. And when you were writing this dissertation, how many years ago was it now?
A decade, I guess.
Okay, so we had to dust it off a little bit for
this. Yeah.
But it's fun. I'm sure when you were writing that thing, I doubt that you were thinking that maybe, hey, 10 years from now I'll be talking about this on a podcast. I don't know if podcasts were existed back then.
No,
I don't think they did.
I wasn't thinking about that, but I sure am glad it paid off. I had to go back and read it and fell asleep a couple times, but here I am, so really happy to be a part of this.
Well, that's good. We appreciate your wisdom on the topic. Okay, well, as always, we thank you for deciding to take some time to listen to our podcast. I hope that it's been helpful for you in your pursuit of your own growth and development, and we look forward to the next time we can have another conversation to that end. Thanks very much.
If you're interested in learning more about what we do, visit our website at synergyperformancesc.com. Join us next time for more relevant topics on The Growth Project.